Welcome. This recorded presentation aims to provide instructions and guidance for completing and submitting invoices for your Senator Kenneth J. Donnelly Workforce Success Grant. During this presentation, we will be reviewing the invoicing section of your grantee guide in more detail. You can find this information on pages 3 to 15 of your grantee guide and in the instructions provided with your customized invoice template. Your invoice template is shared after the execution of your contract. During this presentation, we will review the basics about submitting invoices, how to use the invoice template, what changes are allowable, and how to request a modification. Let's get started. WCTF invoices are due on a monthly basis. If you would prefer a less frequent schedule, please contact your Commonwealth Corporation Program Manager to discuss this. Monthly invoices are due by the 15th of the month for the previous month's expenses. We will provide your organization with a customized invoice template based on your grant's budget. We'll go over this in more detail in the next slide. All invoices must be emailed to your Commonwealth Corporation Program Manager using the original Excel file format. Invoices must be emailed from the authorized invoice submitter as specified in your contract. More familiarly, this person is otherwise known as the fiscal contact or contacts. All expenses must be supported with documentation. Pages 5 through 15 of the grantee guide contain a chart of invoice documentation requirements. We'll go over this in more detail as well. ComCore strives to pay all invoices within 30 days of receiving an accurate and complete invoice. When invoices are not complete or accurate, it may take additional time to correct the invoice and for grantees to receive payment. This presentation will provide guidance to help ensure that all invoices are submitted accurately and completely the first time in order to ensure timely payment. One special note about end-of-year fiscal invoice submission here. ComCore's fiscal year ends June 30th, and it is important that we have an accounting of all fiscal year expenses. All grantees are required to submit all expenses that occurred each fiscal year to ComCore by July 15th of each year in order for these expenses to be reimbursed. You will not be able to bill us for any expenses incurred in one fiscal year in another fiscal year. Now, let's take a look at that invoice template. Each grantee's custom invoice template is in the form of an Excel workbook. This will have 3 tabs, like shown on the screen. Tab 1 are the instructions, Tab 2 is the invoice tab, and Tab 3 is the staff summary sheet. This is required documentation for staff salaries. We're going to review each of these in this presentation. Now that you've opened Tab 2, the Invoice tab, please note that there are 4 sections in total. Each grantee will receive a customized invoice template that includes information specific to their grant, so no 2 templates will be the same. However, they will all print out on a single portrait displayed piece of paper, and here in this presentation, the sections have been clipped for easy referencing. So first we're going to address 1 and 2. 1 being right here at the top, outlined in red. This section is basic information about your grant. You'll notice that the name of your organization, right here, your contract number, to the right of your organization name, your contract start date on the left, your contract end date on the right. Those things are pre-populated, as well as the individual authorized to submit invoices. What you'll also notice is that there are also fields you must fill in each time you complete an invoice. These are the invoice number, reporting period begin date and end date, as well as some others that we'll get to a bit later in the presentation. Please be sure to start with invoice number 1 for your first invoice and go in sequential order with each subsequent invoice. Also, please be sure not to overlap invoice period dates. We find that this can often be a point of confusion and can result in an inaccurate invoice. And so to avoid a delay in payment, for example, if your last invoice reporting date was June 30th, your next invoice date should have a reporting begin date of July 1st. As we then look to the second red highlighted rectangle, we're now in section 2, entitled Grantee Expenses. So this is the section where you record your expenses for the period. All the way to the left, you'll see all of the possible items included in the WCTF budget. You'll also see that your customized template will be set up to align with your budget included in your contract. Please note that a line item will be listed on your template even if you have not budgeted funds for that line item. It will simply show 0 or the dashes that are present on the screen. So please refer to your budget in the contract for approved budget items and amounts that have already been agreed to. Since there are quite a few possible budget line items, this screen that you're looking at only shows the first few categories. The actual invoice you receive will include all possible budget line items, but again, we're just truncating for ease of access here. So the column outlined in dark blue is what we've just been kind of talking through here, these major categories. And next up in brown, we have total previously invoiced expenses. So for your first invoice, this will be blank because you have not submitted an invoice just yet. But then starting with number 2, you will record all previously billed expenses by line item in this column. Later in the presentation, we'll suggest a few tips to make this easier for you. In green here, we have current period expenses. You will record all of your expenses for the current period by line item in this column. Now, finally, in this light powdery blue here, the final 3 columns are all locked formula-based fields. The first tells you the total budget line item inception to date. The second column shows you the budget category inception to date. And then the third column shows you the amount remaining in the budget category. As I mentioned in this slide a little bit earlier, since there are quite a few possible budget line items, this screenshot is only showing the first few categories. However, the actual invoice you receive will have all possible budget line items. So before we move on to the next section, I wanted to show you what the bottom of this section, section 2, looks like. So the last budget category listed is indirect costs, and you'll see that my mouse is just clicking over here, highlighting on the superimposed image, indirect costs. And this percentage amount will be different for each grantee based on what they included in their budget. So in this example, we have an approved rate of 10%. So the template indicates this next to the category label. You'll see that right here. So indirect cost in the green, and then right below, you've got the 10% right there within the cell. If you have an approved indirect rate, you'll see the approved rate listed next to the label on your template. And if you have an approved indirect rate, you'll complete the invoice for this line item just like any other line item. Just please note that if you don't have an indirect line item included in your approved budget, you may not charge for indirect costs. Just gonna highlight that this green section that just came up is just an indication that the totals at the bottoms of these columns will be calculated for you. Now we'll look at section 3 and 4 of the invoice. These are at the bottom of the page of your invoice. So section 3 is the invoice grant match contribution information. You'll see that is just called to attention in red. And then section number 4, calling your attention in red there. So section number 3, this is the section where you'll record your grant contributions for the current period that you're invoicing for. So this is set up very similarly to section 2. The only difference is that we're asking for you to report match contributions by budget category and not by individual budget line items. all the way to the left, you'll see that your template will be set up to align with your match budget contribution. So you'll see that outlined in that darker blue. It will include all of the budget items for the budget category amounts in your match contribution budget. The next column is total previous match, highlighted in yellow here. And for your first invoice, this will be blank because you have not yet submitted an invoice. But then starting with invoice number 2, you will record all previously documented match by budget category in this column. The next column is current period match, highlighted in green here. You will record all of your match contributions for the current period by budget category in this column. The final 2 columns are all locked formulas based on the previous information entered. So again, this is that error proofing that's kind of been popping up that we'll address in just a few moments. So within the lighter blue on the right, the first column shows you the budget category match inception to date. The second column shows you the amount remaining of your match obligation in each budget category. And as with section 2, section 3 also has a row at the bottom for totals that are calculated for you. One important note about match, WCTF grantees must provide a minimum of 30% match of total awarded funds, but may need to document more if a greater amount is included in their match contribution budget. So we have included a formula to calculate the match contribution to expense ratio with each invoice submission. So I'll call your attention on the screen to the yellow oval that just appeared. However, Commonwealth Corporation will be reviewing the match ratio each invoice and does reserve the right not to pay an invoice for grant expenses if 30% match of current billed expenses to date has not been met at the time of invoice submission. Although we do understand that not all match will be reported at exactly 30% ratio to expenses each invoice. This is just a call to action to ensure that you're reviewing this ratio with each invoice submission and reporting all match contributions in a timely manner. If we have questions about your match to expense ratio, we'll be sure to reach out to you, and we ultimately just want to ensure that you'll be able to contribute at least 30% of the match to the completion of your contract. Now, when we look at section 4, which is signatures and certification, I'm just going to call your attention to the dark purple rectangle that appeared on the screen, highlighting that information that we'll be looking for. All invoices must be submitted by email in the original Excel format. So I've mentioned that a couple times. Spoiler alert, I'll probably mention it a couple more. This will allow us really to copy and paste from the invoice that you send us directly into our financial system. So that's one of the reasons why maintaining that original Excel format is really important and helpful to us. Since we're not requiring a pen and ink signature, it's important that the invoices be emailed by the fiscal contacts that have previously been delineated in your contracts. The name of this person is also listed back up in section 1 that we glossed over. Since we will not be able to accept an invoice emailed by anyone other than the designated person, please be sure to let us know if that information changes at any point preemptively. And just as an aside, you'll note that the information, the authorized official's name, aka your fiscal contact, the date, and the title there, those are highlighted in yellow, and we will also address that in just a moment because that's very intentional. So speaking of intentional, really the formatting that you're seeing is our attempt at error proofing. So we've built in error proofing tools into your invoice, and when we receive invoices without errors, we're able to process invoices quicker, really ensuring that you're able to receive your payment not only on time, but expedited when possible. So in order to ensure accurate invoices, we really do stress that we would like you to start with the original template each month to take advantage of the error proofing tools that we've built in. I'll review these with you so you know what you're looking at when you're seeing either things pop up or already present when you open up your template. So first we use conditional formatting to highlight required fields in yellow to remind you to fill these in. So simply just highlighted yellows are reminders. You can see 3 of these at the top of the invoice in section 1. So going to call your attention to reporting period begin date, your invoice number, and reporting period end date in those green rectangles. You may also see a pink shaded cell with red text in the remaining budget column. I'm going to call your attention to that in the brown rectangle there. This means that you have charged more than what was budgeted for a particular budget category. If you see this error, then please review the invoice for accuracy. And if by your standing, your information is accurate, please call your Commonwealth Corporation Program Manager to discuss your invoice before invoice submission. So just continuing here with some error proofing content. Since we've set up conditional formatting in the template to highlight current period expenses, indirect expense line items in purple, if the amount of indirect charges for the current period exceeds the approval rate in your budget, I want to call your attention to that. So you'll notice, I'm going to use my clicker to single out current period expenses here, this column, and we scroll all the way down and we see this purple. This purple is really calling out that you've exceeded the approved rate in your budget. So we're going to pull that out to be a little bit clearer there. We understand that there are various approaches to calculating and charging indirect rates. So if you see that item, that cell turn purple, please review the invoice to ensure the amount entered is correct. And if it is correct, please provide a brief explanation in the body of the email when you submit your invoice to explain why the indirect expense amount for that period is greater than the approved rate. As I mentioned earlier, the last budget category listed is indirect cost. So that's where this is being called out here. And again, just to highlight for you in this example, the approved rate is 10%. So the template is really calling that out. Now, once again, just to really reiterate in section 4, the info that we're looking for that does have conditional formatting are these 3 cells here. And the yellow is just a reminder to fill those in for us. We hope that the error proofing tools we have built into the template assist you in submitting accurate invoices and also ensure that they're really able to be processed in a timely manner so we can ensure that you're paid in a timely manner. We welcome your feedback on the invoice template and any other suggestions you have for built-in error proofing and to make invoicing easier if it's possible. So I know that we haven't submitted our first invoices yet, but it's always good to look forward. So when you are ready to submit your second invoice, we suggest you go back to the original template and start fresh. So this will ensure all of the error proofing tools that we've put in place are cleared and available to assist in error proofing your next invoice. To complete the invoice, you'll once again need to complete section 1, including invoice number, except this time inputting number 2, and the reporting period begin date and the reporting period end date. So those other 2 will be filled in. Then you'll move to section 2 and start by filling in totally previously invoiced column. So that's the light blue that just popped up. You can certainly manually enter this information from your previous invoice. However, you can also copy and paste the information from the line item inception to date. So you can copy from there. Oh, my apologies. So you can copy from the blue and copy it right over, pasting it into totally previous invoiced in the brown. Now, if you do copy and paste we do suggest that you use a paste special function to only paste the values and not the formulas programmed into the line inception to date column. So again, that blue column here has formulas pre-populated into it. So when you copy and then you want to paste into the brown column, you want to ensure that you're not pasting those formulas in. So just as a guide, if you're using a Mac, you would hit Command C and then hold down Control and click to open the paste special function. And for PC users out there, you'd hit Control C and then right click to access the paste function when you're ready to hit that paste special for values only. So you'll want to continue completing section 2 by filling in the current period expenses and then moving to complete sections 3 and 4 of the invoice. And so these current period expenses are highlighted in a green rectangular outline here, because when you're on invoice 2, you want to make sure that you're also billing us for current period expenses. Now, we know that change happens, and so because we understand that over the course of your project, situations may arise that require you to modify your contract, we just want to highlight, there are different types of changes that may require a modification, but here I'm just going to review budget-related changes. All requests to move funds between budget categories beyond 10% will require a formal modification. Also, grantees should not assume that if they have funds remaining in one budget category, that they will be approved to modify their budget and use these funds for a purpose other than the original intended purpose. So for that reason, we strongly encourage you to communicate any potential changes with ComCore to seek approval and be sure that the change does not require a modification. And if it does, that you talk that through with your program manager. It's always best to preemptively address these things so that we're in agreement and we can avoid disallowed expenses. So that being said, grantees are allowed to shift funds between budget line items within a budget category without seeking a modification or requiring an update to their invoice template. However, grantees are responsible for ensuring that they have the funds available within the budget category to cover the overage in a specific line item. And Commonwealth Corporation may still question the expense if the relation to the grant is not clear. So let's take a closer look at this example. For example, if travel expenses exceed the original budgeted amount and the grantee has perhaps lower publication printing costs, the grantee may bill for expenses that exceed the original travel budget and make up for it in the balance of funds in the publication line item. So in this example here, you'll see the brown oval. These are other program costs. This is the budget category. And then on the right, we're looking at the top here at travel and publication, printing, copying as the budget items, the budget line items that exist here. So please note that while you have flexibility to move within budget categories, Commonwealth Corporation reserves the right to question any line item overage and request a reasonable justification for this overage. Additionally, retroactive modifications will not automatically be granted due to overages in budget line items that were not properly budgeted for by the grantee. So the best approach here is to really review any substantial changes with your ComCore program manager to make sure we understand the change and can discuss potential additional budget implications with you. All expenses reported on the invoice submitted to Commonwealth Corporation must be supported with documentation. This has already been addressed in your grantee orientation webinar. Just as a call out, pages 5 through 15 of the grantee guide contain a chart of invoice documentation requirements. This chart includes all possible WCTF budget line items and the acceptable documentation for each type of line item. Now, not all of these line items will apply to your grant, but you should review this chart to confirm what type of documentation you're currently collecting and ensure that it meets the standard for the guidelines for invoices. In addition, we're happy to talk to you if you have any questions or perhaps you're in doubt of something or you have a particular charge for which you may need alternative supporting documentation, we recommend that you read the chart thoroughly. However, in general, we're looking for source documentation that supports the expense amount and purpose. So your organization must maintain those backup documents at your organization's primary place of business. We understand that folks may have businesses with multiple locations. So as long as you're able to centralize that for the yearly visit that I'll talk about in just a moment, that is fine with us. And just as a reminder, you do not need to submit the backup documentation with each invoice at the outset of the grant. So in year one, ComCore will schedule an on-site meeting to review backup documentation associated with a predetermined invoice and review systems used to generate that invoice. So again, your program manager will reach out to your fiscal contact or your primary contact or the program manager to really set up an ideal date, and we'll pre-pick that invoice that we'll be reviewing. ComCore may conduct a similar visit or desk review in the second year as well, based on results from the review in the previous year. ComCore also reserves the right to require any grantees to submit backup documentation with each subsequent invoice based on results of that invoice review that happens in year one, for your reference. For staffing, we're looking for proof that staff was on payroll at the time of the charge to the grant. Just as an example, really calling out this information from the chart on page 5 through 15. And just as an additional note to call out that chart, for other program costs, the type of backup documentation that we're looking for example, for support services or contract services, would be proof of delivery of service or purchase. So receipts or invoices, really just to call those out. And to wrap this up, grantees must also share any allocation spreadsheets or tables used to determine the allocation amount for that period if you are using a cost allocation methodology. So all allocation methodology must align with your organization's cost allocation plan and budget. And on that note, I just want to wish everyone congratulations on completing your invoicing webinar video. This concludes the presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Tatiana Joyce, your program manager. We're also interested in your feedback on the template and the process here for invoicing. So if you have any suggestions on how to improve the template or the process, please let us know. We really appreciate your feedback and your partnership here. Have a good one.